Hi, everybody. I noticed that when I looked at our assignment for this week, there's a lot of people that have not done it, and then there's a few people that have reached out to me with questions on how to do it. So I figured I'd make a video, try to talk you through what you're going to be doing. I didn't want to give you everything, right? I want you to be able to come up with these things on your own, but I figured I'd kind of do my own version and just try to think our way through it. So the one I'm talking about is the organelle analogies. Now you have three assignments this week. One is the organelle analogies. One is just watching those videos, answering the questions about the endosymbiotic theory. And the third one is just labeling the organelles on those cells. So you have those three assignments. The one that everybody seems to be having trouble with is the organelle analogies. So if you look here on the screen, what I've got is I listed all the ones that we've got to come up with. Now, when we talk about an analogy, a lot of times when you take the SAT, there's a lot of analogies on that. Now, you guys are usually sophomores, so you're not to the SAT yet, but it's basically saying this is to that as that is to this. You got to make these comparisons. Another way to think of them is using the term like. Now, technically, that's a simile, but we're going to use it the term like here. So this is like that, and you need to explain to me why that is. So, for example, a camel carries extra water. So a camel carrying the extra water is sort of like us having a water bottle. We have that water available to us when we need it. And that's what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be saying this organelle is like a real life thing and try to make that connection. It forces you to really think kind of outside the box and try to come up with an explanation of what's actually going on with that organelle. So if we look at these organelles that we're going to be talking about, I didn't have all of them. These are just the ones you're going to be talking about. And some of them technically aren't organelles, but they're very important for the cell. So if we look, we've got the nucleus. Well, we've talked about the nucleus. If you look at the PowerPoint, it tells you what it is. But again, I'll just give you a brief explanation of them. The nucleus is where all the genetic information is stored. A lot of people like to say the control center. And if you want to think of it as the control center, that's fine. But really, it's more just a storage bin. It's really like a filing cabinet that's storing all that genetic information. Think of it as a filing cabinet storing recipes. If we need to make something, we open up that filing cabinet and we're getting access to that recipes, which would be the DNA in that case. Cell membrane, it decides what goes in and out of the cell. So if you were traveling to a cell, if we did Magic School Bus and got smaller and went down to the cell membrane would be the first thing we come in contact with. And that's going to determine whether we get to go into the cell or not. It decides that. The cell wall, only found in plants, is actually outside of the cell membrane. So if we went to a plant cell, the first thing we'd come to is a cell wall. But the main job of the cell wall is just to provide structure. If you look at plants, they can stand up on their own without bones, and that's because every one of their cells has that rigid, hard structure that's the cell wall. Mitochondria, we call that the powerhouse of the cell. What they do is they take sugar, break it down, and they're able to produce energy for the cell in the form of ATP. So they're a powerhouse. So let's just take that for a second. When we start thinking about analogies, well, what's something that provides power in the situation that you're wanting to use? Now, if you look at my description, I said you could come up with a school, you could come up with a city, a business, whatever it is you choose. What is it that would provide power for that particular thing that you choose? And then that would be your mitochondria. Chloroplast is probably going to be the hardest one. We're kind of limited, right? Because what do chloroplasts do? Well, they take sunlight, use the energy from the sunlight, and they convert it into a new form, which is going to be the sugar that the plants can use. And ultimately we use because we eat plants. So you're kind of limited is what uses sunlight. Well, there's not a lot of things in the real world that use sunlight other than solar panels. So you might have to end up using solar panels. In my example today, I'm going to use solar panels, and that's okay. Again, we're kind of limited on that. But as long as you understand that the chloroplasts, they're responsible for taking the energy in the form of sunlight and converting it into chemical energy in the form of sugar, then that's going to be very useful. The Golgi apparatus, what I said about that in our PowerPoint is that it is going to repackage things. So things come to it and then gets repackaged and it sends them out of the cell. Now, when I'm talking about it in the real world, I kind of liken it to a warehouse, right? Amazon, a lot of us order from Amazon. Well, what happens? Well, all of these different packages and items, they come to the warehouse and they just hang out there. Then we make our order. And let's say we order 3 different things. Somebody's going to get those, repackage them, put them in a new box, and send that to you. So that's exactly what the Golgi apparatus does. It brings things in, repackages them, and sends them out. It either sends them out of the cell or things come from outside the cell. It repackages them and sends them into the cell. So it's sort of like a warehouse for Amazon. Okay, vesicles. These are just think of it as containers. the trucks that are bringing things to that warehouse, right? The materials have to get to the warehouse in some way. That's what the vesicles do. And if you look at the term vesicle, it sounds like vessel, and vessels travel on the ocean carrying materials. So that should be an easy way to remember that. The vesicles are going to be the things that carry all those materials to the Golgi, and then the Golgi decides where they go. Ribosomes, their big job is to make protein, which is extremely important because really all of our functions are tied to proteins. How do those proteins get made? Well, the ribosomes, they read the DNA. Well, specifically, they read RNA, and then they convert that into protein that our bodies will use for multiple things. And then lastly, I put the endoplasmic reticulum. There's actually two. There's the rough endoplasmic reticulum, which has little dots all over it. And what are those dots? Well, those dots are the ribosomes. So we call it the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And then you have the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. And really all you need to worry about with both of those guys is they move things within the cell. So think of it sort of like a tunnel system that moves things within the cell. So now that we remember all of the functions of all of these, what we need to do is kind of brainstorm and think, well, what can we apply that to? Now, I was kind of thinking before I made the video, how can I give you an example without you just copying me and doing what I did? So I kind of try to come up with something that is relatable in this current time right now and is kind of out there. What I decided is, let me pull up where I'm going to do some drawings here, is I decided that I'm going to do a campaign rally. So right now we've got the presidential election coming up, and we've got both Democrats, Republicans. We've even got some third-party people. They're having campaign rallies. And so we're going to talk about how is it that I can take a campaign rally and liken it to a cell and all the organelles of a cell. Well, if you got a campaign rally, what's really going on is you got somebody, right? They're going to be the one that wants to be the president. And then around them, you've got all these other people. So I'm not going to draw tons of people, right? But we got all these people around them. It's inside a building typically. Now, inside that building, we're going to have video cameras. Now, this is going to be my beautiful video camera right here, right? You're going to have people videoing. You're going to have some reporters on the side over here that are going to be listening to what they say, and then they're going to be talking to their own video cameras. And they're going to be putting out what they think. Also, what else is going on in campaign rally? Well, we're going to have all these big old signs, right? So vote for whoever it's going to be. They might be giving out gifts to all the people that come. Maybe they're giving out signs to the people, or they're going to be giving out shirts or hats or whatever the case might be. But when you think about a campaign rally, this is going to be inside some stadium or something like that. And then we've got all these other things going on. So now let's start looking. We're going to go back and look at our different organelles, and we're going to do a few and just kind of make some ideas with them. So if we come back here, the nucleus. So again, if you want to think about it as the control center, you can think about it as the control center. And in that case, we'll do it here. What or who is controlling the campaign rally? You might think it's the presidential candidate, which if you wanted to say that, you could. The presidential candidate would be like the nucleus. They're controlling everything. But really, the candidate's not the one that controls what's going on. Usually they'll have like a campaign leader or a press secretary, or there's a lot of names that you could have for that person. We'll just say the nucleus is like a campaign we'll call him a leader. Okay, so what's the campaign leader going to do? Well, they're going to control everything. They're going to say, this is how this works, this is how that works, and so on. And so if I want to make my slide, then what I'll do is I'll put a picture of somebody. I'll type into Google and I'll put campaign leader, and I'll have a picture of them, and I'll put that up on my Google slide, and then I'll say it. A nucleus is like a campaign leader because, and this is the key aspect, you got to tell me why they're like that. A campaign leader controls everything about the campaign rally, just like the nucleus controls everything that's going on in the cell. Okay, does that make sense? So let's try another one here. Let's see, we want to go to this guy. Cell membrane. So again, the cell membrane, its job is to decide what goes in and comes out of the cell. So there's a couple you could use right here. The cell membrane. Think of it sort of like a bodyguard almost. It's going to decide what goes in and out of the cell. Well, if our cell is this entire campaign rally, who is it that gets to decide who goes in, right? Who decides who comes in, who decides who goes out? Well, again, you can come up with a lot of ideas. A lot of people, if they're doing something like this, they will say it's like a bodyguard. Or maybe I'm going to kind of change it up here. I'm going to say the cell membrane is like an usher. Now, if you don't know what an usher is somebody, they stand at the door and they look at your tickets and decide whether you get to come in or not. So that's why I'm going to say that a cell membrane is like an usher. So the cell membrane is going to be on the outside right here. So we're going to have our ushers that are waiting at the entrances. They're going to look at your tickets and decide if you get to come to that campaign rally or not. So I will say a cell membrane is like an usher because the usher decides who gets to come in, just like the cell membrane determines what comes into the cell. And again, I'll look up a picture on Google of an usher, which in this case would be pretty straightforward. And then you'll have that picture of the usher there, and you'll be able to move on. So that's what we're doing. It's just thinking about what the organelle does and then thinking about the situation that you decided. Now, again, you could come up with schools, businesses, boats, cities. A lot of times people just choose a city as a whole because there's a lot to choose from with the city. And then we have to say, okay, within whatever our scenario is, what would those organelles be like? Okay, so just quickly, let me just kind of hit some of the other ones here. Mitochondria, right? How do we get energy to this? How is it that there's going to be energy inside this? Well, in a campaign rally, the energy would be electricity, right? You got to run the cameras, you got to run the lights, so air conditioning. So where would you get the energy? Well, you could do two things, right? I could say a power plant outside of this place is going to be producing energy. Or if I really wanted to keep it all tied to this one location, I could say that there are generators somewhere at this campaign rally, and those generators are going to produce the electricity that is needed for this. So I could say mitochondria are like the generators for a campaign rally because those generators are going to produce electricity. Or maybe you wanted to be a little abstract with it, and you'd say the candidate is like the mitochondria because the candidate is producing all this energy with the speech. They're giving a speech and everybody gets excited and starts yelling. So you could, again, have fun with it. Don't feel it has to be exact. I just want you to really think about what the organelle does and then just come up with something. So you can think outside the box. You can stretch it a little bit. Don't feel like it has to do exactly what the organelle would do. Like I said, the hard one would be the chloroplast. Well, if it's a campaign rally, how is it that we're using the sun to make energy? Well, like I said, in this case, I'd have to cheat and I'd say there's going to be solar panels on the roof or outside this place, and those solar panels are going to be able to provide energy for it. So, and that's okay. Like I said, as long as you understand what the organelle is doing, this is just causing you to think a little bit more about that organelle. Okay, we'll do one more. Let's think a cell wall. We'll do cell wall. Now, again, this is limited to plants. But how would a cell wall apply to a campaign rally? Well, if we think, what's going on with a campaign rally? Well, it's inside a building. And what's keeping that building up? What is structural about that building? Well, again, if we think the building has walls, it's got steel beams that make up the walls, it's got concrete that make up the walls. So that would be actually pretty easy. We could just say the wall and structure of the building would act like the cell wall of a plant, providing structure and protection to both the building and to the plant. Now, the tricky one, probably the hardest one for you, is going to be probably the Golgi or the ribosomes. I'll give you one. We'll talk about ribosomes here. So ribosomes, again, what they do is they take the RNA, the genetic information, and they convert it into proteins. So let's think about how can we do that? How can we take something, right? So how can we take something and make some things? What are some things that might be made during the campaign rally? Well, again, I was talking about how things could be given out. They could give things to the people. Well, maybe there's some people off in the corner that are making signs, and they give those signs to the people that are out in the audience. Or maybe they're making shirts and they're giving those shirts to people in the audience. So again, I'm stretching here, right? But we're still making a connection and saying that, well, the ribosomes, they make things. And so therefore, somebody that makes things inside the campaign rally, we can liken to the ribosomes. So those are all the ones I'm going to give you. I'm not going to give you an example for every one of them. But again, you're not limited to a campaign rally. You're not limited to a school or a building or a city. You can really think about whatever scenario you want. But the key is to take these organelles and think about what they do. Then think about how does that apply to your scenario and what would work. So what I expect is for you to ultimately have a slide for each of these organelles. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now again, the endoplasmic reticulum, technically there's a rough and a smooth, but don't worry about that. We'll just do endoplasmic reticulum as a whole. So we want a slide for each of those with a picture and an analogy saying that this is like that because, and that's the key. I need to see the because. You need to make that connection. Okay, hopefully that makes sense for you and you can get that knocked out. So thank you guys.